Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to another edition of Playing Above the Line. I'm Alan, your host, and today we're coming to you from Hatch in downtown Fairhope. We appreciate Rick Miller and his willingness to allow us to use his space for right now. And so if you want to check out Rick and what those guys do at Hatch, you can go to hatchfairhope.com. Our guest today is Rhett Ross, and if that name sounds familiar, it is because he has been a guest on the podcast before. Back on episode 49, Rhett came and visited with us, and during that episode, talked a lot about leadership, a lot of good stuff there. If you remember, and I would encourage you to go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already, but talked a lot about leadership and focused on the 3 Ps back then, people, processes, and product, and really kind of focused on people and the importance of a team and that kind of thing. So I'm sure we'll touch on some of that same stuff today, but what Rhett is doing now is pretty exciting, and so this episode is going to take kind of a little bit different approach, I think, to entrepreneurship and leadership. But anyway, with that being said, Rhett, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Glad to be back.
Well, I am too, and I'm excited. And when Carrie said Rhett's coming back, I was like, all right, what's Rhett got going on these days? And she was saying that you are involved in a company called Deuce Drone. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, I'm intrigued because I have heard, of Amazon obviously using drone delivery. And really when I think about that kind of stuff, though, I think about the big cities, Atlanta, New York, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Chicago. I mean, but you guys are doing the same type thing right in our backyard here in Fairhope. Is that right?
That's correct.
So talk a little bit about what Deuce Drone is, what you guys are doing, and how you became involved in this very interesting project.
Deuce Drone is focused on last mile retail package delivery. And you brought up Amazon. The difference is, for us, the concept is the same. We're going to use aerial drones, also known as small unmanned aerial systems, to carry packages from retailers to consumers and businesses. Mm-hmm. But the difference is we're focusing on local retailers. So Amazon is focused on Amazon.
Okay.
But when you think about it and you walk around our beautiful city in Fairhope or our larger community in the Mobile area, mm-hmm. You see all these great mom and pops. You see all these regional, Greer's Grocery, Rouse's Markets, Vinny's Pizza, and all that. These are great local retailers. You also see the big national brands, Home Depot, Office Depot, and those type. They're not likely to partner with Amazon
right.
to do this. And Amazon is not necessarily caring about the local community. And that's okay. That's what business is all about. And I love Amazon, use them all the time. But what we're focused on is empowering those local retailers to compete directly against Amazon's faster delivery methods by incorporating online order capability with rapid delivery by aerial drones. So we're talking about minutes instead of hours to days.
Yeah. So the guys that had the vision and kind of dreamed up this whole idea, what was the genesis of that? Because this is not something that you can just decide one day I'm going to start delivering stuff via drone, I wouldn't think. I think there's probably a lot that goes into that. So what was the thought process and the genesis behind how this company even became a thing?
It's very interesting to me how all of this happens. And you asked me how I got involved. And I may have said in the last podcast that Navy, if you use it as an acronym, stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. And I've never quite learned that lesson, but yeah. I've developed a great friendship with Philip Burton of Burton Property Group here in the Mobile area over the last few years. And I called him to tell him I was retiring from Continental, and he said, well, that's great. I wanted to call you and take you out to lunch. Not because of that, because he wanted to talk to me about something. And so I said, well, that's great. So we went to lunch, and he had developed a relationship with John Fanning, who you may remember from Napster. Mm-hmm. He and his brother founded Napster.
Okay.
And Philip had met John a few years ago, and while they were talking, John had started talking about drones, and he'd been looking at this for several years. And Philip said, well, that's really cool. Your ideas for using them would meld with his own concerns about keeping commercial real estate relevant. You think about that, Philip worries about if Amazon and other big boxes take this over, there's really no need for the type of multi-tenant commercial developments that Burton Property Group and other real estate firms develop and manage. And so they got to talking, and they said, wow, we could use drones to make these centers relevant. Phillips looks at it as a service offering to his tenants, helps him attract tenants, lowers the cost and the barriers to entry for the small single-person business owners all the way through national chains. And so they started talking, and both of them, great idea, but didn't know what does this mean as you start to play in aviation and aerospace. And that was the genesis of the lunch with Philip, and we sat and talked about it. And I said, it's a great idea. I'm watching this from my seat at Continental Aerospace, and I said, it's definitely coming.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I see it happening. I see it coming. It's a great idea. Devil's going to be in the details.
Yeah.
That was the genesis.
Well, so now from that first lunch to the present time, where are you guys in the R&D stage or the implementation stage? I mean, do you have drones flying now, delivering, or what's does it look like today as it stands?
Yes, we have drones flying. We completed a full technology demonstration a month ago. We're proud to have Rouse's Markets as one of our first retail partners to sign up. Our other one is Potter's Wings, which is a Buffalo Wild Wings franchisee with the Southern Coastal region here in their geographic ownership. And so we went out and we showed the basic fundamental capabilities of how this service would work to them in late August. Great thing. We're continuing the R&D with the plans to start some revenue trials, realistically, I'm going to say in Q1 of 2021.
Okay. So I've got to think that the just logistics and I don't know if this is the right word or not, but bureaucratic red tape, being able to fly things around in the air, has got to be pretty substantial. So talk about some of maybe the hurdles that you guys have had to face and kind of how you've overcome those so far.
You're absolutely correct. We realistically view, outside of the technology is there. All of the enabling capabilities exist today to make this a reality. What I see really is the two challenges is getting certification with the Federal Aviation Administration under the Federal Aviation Regulations to fly air carrier service. That's really what we're doing. So when you think about flying on Delta or sending a package by FedEx, those are air carriers. Mm-hmm. That certification gives them access to the national airspace. And what most people don't realize is as soon as a flying object leaves the ground, it's in the national airspace. Mm-hmm. 1 foot off the ground, you're in the national airspace. Okay, so that's all FAA control. They have a process. They are focusing on drones. They are committed to making drones, drone delivery, drone businesses relevant. Their challenge is this is totally new. All current aircraft typically have 1 to 2 pilots on board, so they're dealing with people. They have the ability to carry manuals. They have all these processes in place. Now they're trying to adapt it to something that's going to have a higher concentration of automation. Yeah. So, the real bureaucratic challenge there is simply working with them to not allow the process to get so hard, so long, so extended that you can't make a good business case.
Right, yeah.
And that's simply trying to overcome what I always tell people as I'm mentoring them is, what's the simplest answer for anybody to give? No. As I tell them when they're trying to think about how to get a new client, no purchasing manager ever got fired by doing what he did yesterday. Yeah. Bringing in a new service, a new supplier is always a risk. Yeah. So you got to find ways to bridge those gaps and get past the no. We're working well with the FAA. We've got some good partners. We've got some good advisors. And I've had with Continental a great relationship with the FAA and understand how they work. And I feel that they respect that I've approached this from the number one criteria, which is safety. Yeah. Now, the other big barrier is the local communities. And barrier is not the right word. But as we've watched the Ubers come out with the original taxi alternative, and then we've watched these little electric scooters and the little electric bikes come into cities, people embrace that. But part of the problem is when they come in without involving the community, you do start to see resistance climb up. Why? Because suddenly the person with a little brownstone in the middle of downtown suddenly finds 10 scooters on their front stoop, and they're
right.
like, this is bad. This is not what I signed up for. Imagine walking outside of the hatch here and, you can't get out the door for all of the tenants dropping their scooters there in the morning, planning to take them in the afternoon. So that's what tends to build the negative response from the communities that then start to drive the resistance. So we've looked at that, and I've looked at that and said, part of this is to get involved with the community and help them understand. There's suddenly going to be drones flying over your property, carrying packages. But how do we help them understand they're safe? How do we help them understand that, no, we're not taking pictures of them in their backyards and all this other stuff? That's the key thing to get out ahead of. And we've started that. We've partnered a little bit with the city of Foley. We went in and briefed in open session, the city council, and just said, here's what's going to happen. We're going to be very focused on things like safety, noise, privacy, and all that. Get ahead of it.
Yeah.
Work with the communities, and then they start to embrace this.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, I'll tell you what, as you were talking, it hit me that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, your 3 Ps that you focused on in episode 49. I mean, really, those things are still in play with what you're talking about now. It's people, processes, and product. I mean, you got the drone that's the product, the processes of trying to go through the red tape and the approval channels and that kind of thing for getting the drones flying, and then the people are the most important thing again, because you've got the stakeholders, which are the community members that are going to have these things flying over their houses. So that's good. So it's obvious to me, listening to you with your involvement in Deuce Drone, and then before that Continental Aerospace, and then Teledyne before that you have an entrepreneurial spirit, even though I think some people kind of put an entrepreneur in a box of they've got to go out and start their own business. Well, I don't subscribe to that theory. I think that you can work for someone or with someone and be an entrepreneur and not necessarily start something from scratch. So have you always had that entrepreneurial spirit about you, do you think? Or is that something that's kind of developed as life has gone on?
I think I've always had it. I've always taken I'll say the harder path. I've sought out, whether it was joining the Navy to try and gain skills that would help me in a future career, or when I left the Navy and finished up my grad degree, I joined an early stage company, then involved in fuel cells and alternative energy. And that gives you that sense of just even when you're with an established business, you're always trying to find ways to innovate and be new and open in those businesses, as opposed to getting clogged down in the natural stagnation and bureaucracy that goes on with them.
Yeah, no doubt. How would you define the term entrepreneur? Because like I said, a lot of people, when they hear that word, they think, well, that's someone who goes out and starts something from scratch. You've taken a different path, but I think you're one nonetheless. So, I mean, what is your personal definition of what an entrepreneur is?
It's a great question, and I'll be candid. I've never quite thought about that, but the what the definition is. But I think to me, what it always means is openness and innovate. And that doesn't mean you have to go out. I look at my wife as an entrepreneur, but what she did was she went out and said, I want to get back into the business world. I want to run my own business. As she moved out of, God bless her, being a stay-at-home mom. But she said, I'm going to innovate in some areas, but I don't want to have to come up with everything. So she went and found a franchise that worked for her, and she started a business. So it's just that openness to ideas, and it's the willingness to innovate. The innovate was for her that she took all the training for the franchise. She listened to what they said, but then she said, part of what they do is they view people as a commodity in the business model, and they view that as their primary cost control point. And she said, no, I want to have stability in the business. I want to have a great team, and that's what's going to grow my business. And so she took a little bit different approach on how to compensate, motivate, and innovate with the team, because hers is a service business.
Yeah,
I think that's what entrepreneurism. Many people get confused and say, well, it's these people coming up with these high-tech ideas. And no, that's just openness to ideas and innovate. And in that case, they're innovating technologically.
And I think that's a great definition. But one of the things that you just said, and it really never has hit me before like this, but when we talk about innovation, and you were talking, technology just then, but there can be innovation that has absolutely nothing to do with technology, right? I mean, you can innovate your, the way that you deal with your people, the way that your processes work, and that kind of thing. So it's not, innovation is very important to what we're talking about, but it is absolutely not just a technological term.
That's absolutely true. And I think that's where people miss it in so many ways and so many times. So, it's just that willingness to think, how do I make this better? It's something I've learned, and it's an area that I continue to struggle with sometimes. and always being able to implement it. But, part of our goal in all of this is remove barriers.
Yeah.
Any way you look at life, we want to remove barriers. So whether it's like Deuce Drone, we want to remove the barrier of the cost and difficulty of last mile package delivery. Mm-hmm. When you think about in your home and just sharing duties, you want to remove the barriers of like one person cooking all the meals or cleaning the house or something else. So you find those things within the family to help there. Many entrepreneurs are just removing a barrier. You go back to the old days when all of us used to mow our own yards. Mm-hmm. Lawn services started cropping up, and they removed barriers and cost structures that meant that even the common man now, or common person, sorry, Carrie, the common person can be freed up from the weekend toil.
Yeah.
And I think going back to that entrepreneur, there's one other key thing. You got to start. Mm. So many of us have good ideas. So many of us have openness to them, but so many of us fail to start.
You're absolutely right, and that is so simple, but it is so easy to not do, to miss, for sure. Let me ask you this. In the show primer, everything that you listed under the qualities of what you think someone needs to be a good leader, I think they can dovetail in with entrepreneurship as well. Selflessness, listening, patience, continuous learning, decision-making, decisiveness. All those things absolutely are qualities of a good leader, but you've got to have those, every one of them, I think, to be a good entrepreneur and a good business person, in my opinion. Any one of those stand out as more important than another, the most important maybe on the list, or do you think they're all equally valuable?
I think one that's very important, and especially these days, it's just the changing dynamics of the world, but listening, and I'm one that struggles with the art of listening. But listening is very important. I think it's one of the harder attributes of good leaders. I think many leaders have had failures because of an inability to listen. Mm-hmm. The other one I think that people confuse, and you get patience and decisiveness, and people go, well, you can't be patient if you're decisive. Mm-hmm. That's not true. Patience means to take the time to get enough information to act. But when you act, you have to be decisive and stand behind your decision. You can't waffle. You can't, 2 minutes into the scrum, you can't suddenly decide, wow, I made a mistake. Now I got to reverse course, because nothing ever gestates that quickly. But I think those are kind of areas that many people have difficulty with. But probably this day and age, I think one of the most important is listening, and not many of us do that well.
No, and there's a difference between hearing and listening. I can hear you, but I might not be listening to you. So
correct.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Well, and so you mentioned needing to work on listening and patience. What's the practical application of doing that? How do you improve on actually listening to people and having that patience? Have you found anything that's worked for you, or is that still kind of a work in progress?
It's kind of a work in progress, but over the last few years, I've started to get a lot better. And I think one of the first things is trying to replay conversations in your head. And I've started getting worse again recently. So many of us are in a hurry to add our own thoughts. Yeah. I tell you where I started going backwards was with the innovation of COVID and Zoom. Mm-hmm. So Zoom is now a verb, just like right. Just like Google and a few other things. Right. So I expect my check in the mail Zoom. When you think about it, it puts us back in that semi-anonymous role. It's very hard to get all the body cues and stuff, but we find ourselves, before somebody's finished their thought, starting to interject our own thought, or even just trying to interject a, yes, I'm listening. That disrupts people when you're on a phone call or a Zoom call. And that disruption takes away from the listening for both parties. Mm-hmm. I did it to somebody yesterday on the phone. Actually, it was Philip Burton while we're talking, and we're both passionate, kind of fast-paced people. But you've got to stop that natural tendency. Start to think about giving that pause when somebody stops talking. They might just be taking a breath. So right. Take that extra 5 count before you start your response. And you might find sometimes that all they were doing was taking a breath and then finishing their thought. And it can be so powerful.
I agree. And what do you think it is about silence that just makes people uncomfortable? Because some people, you know them, I know them, some people just absolutely cannot stand for there to be any break in the conversation, any silence. And so they feel like they've got to just say something that may not be substantive, but they've got to say something to fill that that void when I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's okay just to kind of take a step back, take a beat or two, let what was just said sink in, and then go from there. But what is it about silence you think just makes people uncomfortable?
I think some people it's not a matter of discomfort. Some people it's just a matter of they want to participate. Some people just don't care and want to be heard. You're absolutely right. There are a group of people that where silence is uncomfortable, and I think it's just human nature. Mm-hmm. We're conditioned for noise. I tell people a story way back. I was on my submarine, slept on the starboard side of the boat, which was fed by the port side electrical generator. It had a bad breaker on it, so it regularly popped. I was the officer in charge of the electrical department. So I became conditioned to listen to the air conditioning noise, even when I was asleep. If that air conditioning noise, the little vent in my bunk rack went silent, I woke up. Didn't matter. Mm-hmm. Woke up, headed straight aft to go see what was going on. So to this day, silence bothers me. I wake up if there's a change in noise, if there's silence. And so part of it is we're just conditioned for noise.
I agree, and I think there's a lot of noise out there that is useless in my opinion, but that's another podcast entirely. Talking about your Navy days, you mentioned in episode 49 when you were here with us before, your third CO in one stint on the submarine was a mentor to you and someone that influenced you. This time we asked you the same question, and you mentioned John McCain, John F. Kennedy, George Patton. I see a theme there. They're all political, military-type leaders. What about those guys intrigues you, or what do you admire about them?
For different reasons. So when you look at George Patton, great leader, great motivator. He knew how to motivate troops. He was a very hard man in a very hard business, and I think people confuse that. But I look at him because he focused on strategy, he focused on a can-do attitude, and he communicated with his troops to tell them why they were doing something. Many people forget Patton moved an entire army to save a group of soldiers encircled by the Germans. Everybody, and I forget whether it was 48 or 72 hours, but everybody said this is impossible. But he told his troops why they were doing it, what it meant, and they made the effort, and they came through and did it. And they registered that particular group of men. As I remember, a famous saying came out, the Germans presented the surrender demand to him, and the general in charge of those encircled troops sent back a one-word reply, which was nuts. But that, because he had also told his troops and had that. But you look at that, and it's that communication, and it's involving the team. It's not being a democracy. It's not giving them the right. He didn't give the troops to say you don't have to do it if you don't want to. But he explained to them why, and they found it worthwhile. And he led by example.
Yeah.
So there was that. John McCain showed how to recover and survive and lead in a very difficult environment when he was a prisoner of war for all those years. He demonstrated the leadership of when offered, because he was politically connected, to be released early, he said no. I mean, that raises the spirits of others, that demonstrates selflessness. And he exemplified that when he came back through most of his political career. Mm-hmm. And John F. Kennedy was somebody else, when you look at it, had the fortitude to go to war, had the fortitude to come back and give himself to the nation. But what most interested me was when it came down to the crisis time, he made up for potentially his waffling on the Bay of Pigs, but he made up by avoiding nuclear war. And so he demonstrated how to listen to his advisors and work there. So each of them, for me, have key nuggets of great leadership traits and calm under fire and calm in different situations.
Yeah, that's great. Speaking of calm and difficult situations, we're in the midst of one now. COVID's still a thing. Talk a little bit about how that, if it has affected Deuce Drone and the plans that you guys had to, as far as your rollout strategy and your timetable. I mean, has that affected kind of what you guys are doing there, or have you been kind of insulated from the upheaval?
It's affected us in the early days when it was really hard. It made it hard to meet and get certain things done, but we were, we had an advantage. We were a very small team. So, large companies, I feel for every one of the leaders that have had to deal with this with larger established companies. It's just not easy. We were blessed to be initially a team of 4, so much easier. Pre-COVID, the move to online shopping, the move to more and more delivery and stuff, and even to a certain extent, delivery of local goods by other services was starting to pick up as a convenience thing.
Right.
What COVID has done is accelerated that. We are much more conditioned to order our groceries online, pull up to the curb, and they're placed in our trunk for us. We're much more conditioned to pull up, like I'll do tomorrow, to Best Buy and run in and grab the computer that's waiting for me at the checkout desk, run in, show my ID, and run back out again. So that convenience has been accelerated. So that's increased the level of interest in what we're developing.
As you were talking, I was thinking, well, I mean, timing is never great for a pandemic, but I mean, I'm thinking that you guys in your space with drone delivery of more localized retail goods is probably not bad timing, because it really has made people realize the convenience and really the safety issue at this point with non-contact type delivery stuff is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if it were available today, you'd see them flying around all over the place already.
Our time is running short, but talk about the vision for Deuce Drone. Where do you hope to see? And I think probably in this particular instance, 5 years down the road is probably way too far. So what is your vision for Deuce Drone right now? I mean, where do you see the company in the next 6 months, year maybe, as far as implementing what you guys have envisioned as far as drone delivery?
Our vision, as I said, is to provide a service to local retailers. That includes providing drone fleets, full drone fleet management, the hardware and software that allows the drones to integrate into retail operations, which is an area many people, there's some competitors we have and they're thinking about this, but most people don't think you've also got to integrate all of this into the retail operations. So as I said earlier, in Q1, we expect to start running some limited delivery trials to start verifying a lot of our capabilities in a controlled environment. We'll be doing that here in the Mobile, Baldwin County region. By middle of next year, we'll be running some small multi-unit fleets on an expanding geographic scale within that same environment. Simultaneously, we'll be obtaining our Part 135 FAA certification that makes us a full-up air carrier and refining all of the control software algorithms. We'll be expanding throughout the Mobile, Baldwin County region in 2022 and then starting to move out across the southeast region and other suburban cities. Just very quickly, I think you said earlier you thought this was a great opportunity in the big cities, New York, Chicago. Actually, we don't see that as the market. Those are going to be the most complex places with high rises, extraordinary density and everything else. You're likely to see drone delivery in those, but probably ground-based.
Okay.
We see aerial drones, suburban markets are perfect. You could picture the non-downtown area of Atlanta. Right. We're eyeing that city with great anticipation.
Yeah. Well, I may have misspoken at the beginning of the podcast. So right now, are there drone deliveries happening in the bigger metropolitan areas, or is this something that has not even started yet?
Like us, there are others that are doing this, limited trials. There is nobody, I would say, that is doing this yet as a going business and expanding. And all of us have the same limitations in a number of areas.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's something to look forward to. Rhett, this has been a great Where Are They Now episode. Thanks for coming and telling us a little bit about what you have going on now. It's been very informative. If folks want to check you guys out, they can go to deucedrone.com. You spell Deuce, D-E-U-C-E, drone.com. Rhett, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Avizo Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avizogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.